It's blinking. There you go. We're back to swivel. All right, before we get started, I wanted to go over some things. First of all, I think everybody now who's here has signed up. We have a few that have not. I changed some things on December 1st, which is the first date, which I know will probably not panic anyone, only because I'm trying to give you opportunities to hear from other people also. I have a friend who works for Adoption Star, and she's offered to come in with the executive director, because when we're talking about diversity in the classroom and we're talking about empathy and thinking about our students and environment and where they come from, that's a whole different area of working with children who come into your classroom who are adopted. Sometimes parents are forthright with you and let you know, sometimes they are not. Why we're going to talk about that? Think about the many conditions that you might be teaching that might involve some emotional and cognitive thinking of children who come from an adopted family. The conditions are different, especially when you're talking about different cultural things and traditions, environment, Mother's Day, Father's Day, all kinds of things that might affect. If you're talking about genealogy in the classroom and you have an adopted student who may not know anything about their biological family, sometimes they're not willing to share, sometimes the discussion is different. So I wanted to get the perspective from the Adoption Star agency because they work with school systems and transitions and helping families. So I thought it'd be another important key to your future to have that kind of information and availability. So I'm booking them for December 1st, and they'll be here for like 45 minutes at least to an hour. And then think of questions that you might want to ask as educators. What would you like to know? Working with parents and the adoptive child, and what conditions and how, in fact, confidentiality is a huge part of that for you as a teacher, but how can you help that child with assimilating in your classroom? A lot of times that happens like mid-year. You might have a new child that enters your classroom and adopted from other countries. And so that's a whole assimilation to a brand new culture, a family, a country, coming from school districts or lack of schooling, like I spoke to you about my friends who adopted the 3 children from Bogota, teenagers, and coming into our school systems without having formal education. So thinking about what kind of transitions can we do as teachers in the classroom to make them feel comfortable and a part of your community in your classroom. So I thought that would be another good avenue. And then I have the grad student that I'm working with, and she's going to come in and do her presentation because she's doing independent study with me as part of a psychology course. So she's doing her research project. So other than just presenting the research to me, I thought it'd be important that she also shares research with you. So she's going to come in and do that also. So also, on Thursday this week, Mrs. Z couldn't make it today, so she's coming in on Thursday. If you have a laptop, bring your laptop. The iPad does not work really well for chalk and wire. I hate to say that, but our campus is not well equipped with chalk and wire and Blackboard on iPads. So if you have your own laptop, please bring that with you on Thursday. We will bring up a laptop cart from the education department, but if you have yours, it's better that you save it on your own laptop and you'll have availability. So she's going to talk to you about your upper division portfolio, setting you up in chalk and wire, making sure your account is active. She'll take you around a trip on chalk and wire so that you see what the resources are for you. And then for this class, now my other class, I have to upload a swivel of their lesson plan and their lesson plan. This class you have to, in upper division portfolio, which is different than their growth measure that they're uploading. It's very confusing, but we're trying to get on board here. You will be uploading your research paper with the rubric, when I give you everything back at the end of the semester. So that's part of your upper division portfolio. So as freshmen, now last semester, the seniors were trying to upload all their things into upper division portfolio on chalk and wire because it wasn't all set up prior to last year. So you're lucky that you're doing this right now and you're adding the pieces along the way. So by the time you graduate, everything will be there and ready to go. So she will be here on Thursday. It will take a while, so be prepared, and she will help us with that. So today I want to go through Chapter 6 of the Culture and Diversity and talk about what does that mean to you as teachers in the classroom. As I said, I posted, I believe, Chapter 7 on Edmodo. That's the last chapter I will post with assignments for you. If I post the other chapters, all the other PowerPoints will be up there, but you won't be responsible for any assignments anymore on Edmodo Chapter 7, because I really want to have you concentrate on your research paper. So I just want to get a gauge. How is everybody doing on their research assignments? You're finding enough? Does anybody have to change a topic or anything? Are you feeling comfortable? Sam?
No, I wanted to ask you because I'm on Edmodo right now.
Yes.
I have lesson 6.
Okay, sorry.
No, it's fine.
I posted 7 on iTunes U for another class. It said November 2nd, but that's okay.
Chapter 6 says today.
Yeah. The assignment.
We're on chapter 5 still.
5 was due on the 2nd, yeah. Don't worry about the assignment dates. So if 6 was the last one I posted, I was trying to keep ahead. So 6 is the last one you'll have to do. So worry more about spending the time on your research and pulling together your resources and making sure you're following. So everyone's doing all right with that? Yes? Okay. Just want to gauge it. So Thursday, we'll give you some more time to work on the chalk and wire and become more comfortable. And then let me know. We'll continue on through the chapters along the way. And then let me know how you're doing with getting ready for your presentations and all. Okay? So let's look at Chapter 6 now and the overview and objectives. When you hear culture and diversity, tell me some things that word association. What pops into your head? What's some ideas? What's some thoughts coming from now education? Perspective here. What do you think about when you hear those two words, culture and diversity? Word association. What pops into your head? McKinley? Right? People learning different ways. What else? Different languages. What else could be part of diversity? When I say the word culture, and if I would ask you to tell me about your culture, what are some things that you would describe for me that would be included in that word culture? Religion. It's a big part of it. Family life. Ethnicity. Yep, traditions. Think about when we study holidays or different traditions along the way. Religion is a big part of that within your school districts. Now, think about certain school districts. Is anyone here that went through Williamsville schools? Okay. Describe for me the conditions for the environment for traditional celebrations in Williamsville around culture, religion. You may not know the differences because you were part of the school system, but was one of the things that Williamsville was like one of the first school districts to kind of step out and do. When they celebrate holidays, what happens in the schools? Like, how is it referred to? Like, think about the traditional holidays, Halloween, Christmas. Are there different references to celebrating those holidays? What are some other holidays that Williamsville might typically celebrate beyond those two large? The population there is very diverse. Yes, they do. They celebrate all the Jewish holidays. Also, they have a very large Muslim population, so they recognize the Muslim holidays. Now think about the school district where you went to school. What did your school district, what did your classroom do for celebrating holidays? Were they recognized, or were they called holidays and not referred to as holidays? Right. Why do you think they changed the language in school celebrations?
Not only celebrating Christmas, but other holidays.
That's right. So you have to be respectful of the different cultures, diversity, religions that you have in your classroom. Say, for example, if you have a Jehovah's Witness family in your classroom. Does anyone know about the background Jehovah's? What happens with Jehovah's as far as holidays or celebrations?
I know because my uncle
Jehovah?
and they don't celebrate any holidays.
Right. And what else don't they celebrate? Birthdays.
They only celebrate their mother's birthday.
Their mother's birthday. Why is that? Do you know why that's so?
I don't know why, but I know that, well, it's like an honor
Right.
because of their birth.
Right. So they honor their mothers, but not their own birthday. So think about having a child in your classroom who's a Jehovah's Witness. What do you see typically on the walls in elementary school? Birthday lists, don't you? What else do you see on the walls that's part of the community? The holidays. So now you have a child who is Jehovah's Witness. Now you as a teacher cannot ostracize that student and make them feel uncomfortable because they're part of your community. So what can you do as a teacher to encompass so that child's not feeling uncomfortable and not recognized? Because no one religion is more important than another, so you want to make them all feel like a community, just as we talked about ESL children. So what can you do as a teacher to help with that? What would you do? If the child does not recognize the birthday, well, don't celebrate it. Right, do something different. Now, another thing about Jehovah's Witness, and the parents will usually tell you in your first meeting with them, they Giselle's like, yeah, because they're very strong on their belief in Jehovah.
A girl in our, she was actually in my grade, and every time like the teacher would tell her parents about a party or something that we were having, and she just wouldn't come to school that day.
Right. That's most frequently what they do. They keep them out of school if they know that there's something within the school that they're celebrating.
Part of she was in chorus or listened to the holiday concerts.
But you know why they look at that? They don't look at it as she's singing a holiday song or Christmas song. That's part of their education. So they don't recognize it as, like Santa Claus. But it's something that she's learning as part of her education. So there are kind of leeways that they allow. It depends also on the family, because I had a Jehovah's Witness in the class, and whenever we were even working on a book or coloring that had anything to do with one of those holidays, she would have to have something different. And again, if you think about it from a child's point of view, think about yourself growing up in your own home with whatever religion and beliefs you have. When you go to school, you're part of an eclectic group. And so that's uncomfortable, I'm sure, to the children to feel like they can't be a part of. I also had a child that would kind of like not tell the parent, kind of like, please let me do it. And that's horrible for a teacher. You never want to make them feel that uncomfortable. And you don't want to make them feel like, I can't tell mom and dad, but I really want to do this. So you have to kind of like fine line. So either you are accepting of that and you just make things holiday, without, so you celebrate seasons versus holidays. So you have to make that decision based on what's happening in your classroom. And that's part of the diversity that we look at as teachers. You may have your own beliefs, but you can't impart those beliefs onto your children. So if it's part of a lesson that you're studying, like say cultures around the world, and part of the cultures you're studying has to do with traditions and families and customs. Like typically a lot of schools do a study of Christmas around the world, and they talk about the different countries and how they celebrate that part of the holiday and the concepts. So that kind of brings in a lot of the cultures.
I don't know religion anymore, but my neighbors don't celebrate Halloween, so it was like really awkward when we
Oh.
were trick-or-treating, like their mom would like come out and like stare at them. So like, but I don't know what the religion is, but they just like they celebrate Christmas and everything else, just like not Halloween, so it's like a day of sin and like.
A lot of it may not be a religion, but a lot of people have the belief about Halloween being a satanic holiday, calling in spirits, and that's why they don't celebrate it. McKinley?
That's how my culture is. Like we all celebrate. Well, my parents don't, but I do. We're just like
It's evil, right? Well, because if you do the research on how Halloween, began, some of it was part of a. But that's not what our culture recognizes Halloween. We don't bring out evil spirits. But we try not to. but if you think about it, like you'll see, like I always steered away from having anything like witches and ghosts. Because you don't want to explain to kids. I mean, because some kids who don't understand, that's like, you're treading lightly when you get into subject areas like that you have discussions. If kids ask you that, I mean, the pat answer, well, what does your parent believe? Because you don't want to instill, because the next thing you know, that next morning you're going to have the parent in your classroom with the principal saying that you were teaching them about something that they don't believe in. So you have to really kind of tread a thin line, but, be careful about what you discuss. Like, you'll get into, some children will start discussing, well, we don't believe in God. And you have to be very careful about having any kind of religious discussions in your classroom. You can do it as a study. It could be part of your history. It could be something that's part of embedded in your subject area, but you have to be really careful about claiming any kind of your own belief in the classroom. It's just like the whole thing with Pledge to the Flag and honoring America. You see the postings all the time, how people don't believe in, pledging the flag. And what's the line that they don't believe in reciting? One nation under God. Because they feel that's treading on their belief. So you have to think about that, but that's part of history. That's the United States of America. So it's how you apply it and study it. And that's part of that diversity and the differences. Erin?
Some stuff too, with like people saying bless you.
Yes. Yes. Some people yeah. So if you sneeze, I can't say God bless you. It doesn't, right. So you can get into fine lines along the way. And like I said, just concentrate on what your community builds. And you know what? There's going to be people along the way, and you know that in society yourself. You're going to always offend somebody someplace. And it's not that you go out there trying to, but don't you? And just right now, typically in society, it's like anything you do, it's an offensive to somebody. So part of teaching is kind of getting over that. So let's look at the casebook study on 208. and look at again, what would you do? Oh, wait a minute. Yeah, we didn't do this one. This is part of the culture. So read that case book, and we'll talk about it. Okay, your reaction to the case study. Have you ever been involved in a scenario such as that in school? Yes?
Yeah. At my school, it's because in Los Angeles, it's a lot of
Yeah.
Latinos.
Mm-hmm.
So at my school, it was basically you're ostracized if you're white,
Wow.
like instead of the other way around. So we would basically just try not to have contact with them, or I mean, some people would because obviously like that's me, but it was never.
What do you think was the background to ostracizing because of the large Latino population? What do you think the underlying is to ostracize the whites?
I think it was because we hear a lot about like racism,
Mm.
and usually there's a lot of bullying going on when the white people they basically just generalize the Latino population as Mexican,
Okay.
so that was a big thing.
So
Like that.
because there was whatever was a small sect, was it a large population of whites that treated Latinos that way?
Well, yeah, like almost most of them.
So thinking about the opposite of that, I know it's not right or wrong, and it made you probably feel uncomfortable too. But think of now they were which is the opposite, the minority, which here in our area, it would be the majority, right? So you're in a whole different facet. So you're a perfect person to help us with that eclectic cultural feeling. So what happened to the white population as they were in school with you?
They just kind of did their own thing. They were their own group. Because we've had those distinct groups of like the jocks, the cheerleaders or whatever, but we didn't have it in that way. We had it in the ethnic group. So
Ah.
it was like the people who had parents that were Mexican, the people who had parents that were from Salvador or like other places, and the Asians and the white people.
Wow. So that must have been really difficult for the teachers.
Yeah.
Did you have struggles in the classroom academically because of that?
Yes and no. No, sometimes because there were those teachers that they just looked past the fact that everyone was kind of like in their own group,
Mm-hmm.
and they just made sure that we were all there.
Right. Working together.
But then there were problems because sometimes the teachers, they wouldn't pay enough attention
Ah.
to how we were all separate. So they would kind of seem like, and they were, I don't know, they would just let like, the bullying go on and stuff like
Do you think it was fear?
yeah. Because there were so many Latinos. There were more Latinos obviously than anyone else. So it was so easy for someone to just turn around, speak Spanish, and then everyone
Oh.
was laughing, and then
Oh, okay.
The teacher is confused, and obviously everyone else is.
Okay, so that brings a good point. So the population of teachers that were in the school,
They were like
they were all white,
most of them.
most of them. So you see the reverse kind of segregation there. You're right. It would make a teacher, if I was teaching in a solely Latino school and didn't understand the language, and you're right, with a scenario like that going on, if they're laughing, talking amongst themselves, then as a teacher, it would make me feel very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
But then you'd have to work harder to bring that acceptance out in the classroom.
Yeah, and there were teachers like that where they did they brought us all together, like, because I had a math teacher, she was Asian, and she would always, like, we would call her the disser, because she secretly knew how to speak Spanish, but she
Oh.
would never tell anyone.
Good for her.
People would talk really bad things about her, and everybody would be like, "Oh my God, so funny, so funny," and she would turn around and be like, "I know exactly what you're saying. Come here, you're getting like
Right.
written up. Get
Good
out
for
of the
her.
classroom." Yeah.
So that's a reverse kind of population that we're talking about. Good examples. Thanks for sharing that. Anybody else be in a scenario? How many of you have gone completely through school where it's typically like a total white population with maybe 1, 2? Okay, so what is that environment like? Oh, oh yeah. And I love to see it on the news. I love the lawnmower riding day to school. Tractors and lawnmowers, yeah. Because what part of that culture do they bring to their community?
I don't know, they all call themselves rednecks, and they like make moonshine in their backyards like this.
So it's more of the farming cultural
They're all like from
community, right? So they bring that into their school. I mean, that's their culture. That's their process.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a different kind dealing with. Erin?
I went to Catholic school, and grammar school, and high school, so it was all majority white population.
Did you have any minority?
Very little.
Very
More
little.
in my grammar school, but very little in my high school.
So that's kind of like a reverse kind of prejudice, honestly, because typically what you find in a private school, and I agree with you, is that because of the cost of a private school, that the population is middle and upper class, which typically in an area like that is more white, Caucasian. How about anybody else?
With us, it was a lot of like foreign exchange students.
Yes.
We had a lot that came through our school district, so we could kind of notice like people talk to them, but it wasn't like how they talk to people that they know, like they're kind of like
An over acceptance.
yeah.
I hate to say it, it's that Redskin name.
That's why we got it.
That's why though. Sorry, I am born and raised in the community. It's that culture thinking, and either you have it's nothing in between. It's either you're here or you're there, and that's why Lancaster had such a huge controversy going about the Redskin name. They could not understand either or concept, and they're still trying. Oh my gosh, every day you go by and there's another sign or another posting with the shirts that are being reposted. And now there's more and more. There's once a Redskin, always a Redskin. And you teach your children that, it's not what you call them. It's who we are as a community and population. Sabrina?
I went to Barker and
Oh,
the Raiders, so
yeah.
the mascot is like a Native American and like
Yes.
stuff. And for a while they tried to get rid of it, but Barker's such a small town and like nobody
There's not enough people to-
so it never happened.
Right. So that's what happens when you go from a population of either, we were talking earlier today about, the population around the reservations in our area, being cognizant of, and they have their own schools and they have their own eclectic group. So there's so much diversity that you have to think about within your classroom, and using terminology and not meaning it as a segregation, but that comes out that way to a population. So you have to be very cautious about that. And today's diverse classrooms, especially in our area, all of New York State, think about what's happening. Have you seen the postings lately about the immigrant population? What's happening to to the flood of our population in our area. It's grown. Why? What's happening in the society, in the world right now that is flooding? Pardon me? Refugees. And we're going to, and in the chapter it talks about there's a difference between immigrants and refugees. So you think about the flooding population. Kenmore had a huge population of refugees being brought in because you think about the sects around which are brought in by religious groups. The churches are bringing in a lot of refugees. And so they set them up in communities and help them establish themselves here. And you think about New York City, the hub, when they bring in lots of refugees and immigrants. So that's what we're going to talk about. But beyond the culture changes, we're going to talk about the economic and social class differences, because that makes a big difference within your school district. And we talked about that a little earlier, and we're going to emphasize. Then the ethnicity and race in teaching and learning, because you have to be really careful when you're teaching history and you're talking about the differences in race and ethnicity, that you're not offensive to your students but accepting. And another big diversity right now is gender in teaching and learning, and the multicultural education now. We did that. Okay. So these are our objectives that we're going to cover. Social class, race, ethnicity, and gender. How does that influence our classrooms now in such a diverse society? And some of us didn't come from a very diverse area. But as a teacher, you have no idea what school you'll be teaching in. And you may be in one of the schools that had one of the high diverse populations. So coming from Lancaster, where we have, again, very little diverse population, except for the foreign exchange students, how will you relate to other cultures when you're out in a community school like that may have a very high population? But on the reverse side, Giselle, when you're working in a school here that might be primarily all white, and you're used to Latino, and you're thinking about how different that culture will be for you in relating to a population that may be less diverse than that. So we have to step aside as teachers and really care about how we're influencing our education. Explain the meaning of the stereotype threat and the possible effects on student achievement. That goes to stereotype, doesn't it? I'm sure that many of you have heard, even growing up and influenced around in the environment you live in, stereotypes about certain people. I'm Polish. Talk about stereotype. There's a lot of stereotype about Polish population. And yes, you laugh along with it because I figure that's more ignorance on their part. But when you stereotype a group of people that way, every group of people you meet, there's going to be different sects of those group of people. So you have to think about, do you keep with your stereotype or open-mindedness and accepting to all? Then you're going to talk about the dialect difference in bilingual. We talked about it a little before. But thinking about those language differences and what we do right now for our modern education system to help with that. We're going to talk about the multicultural education, and then we're going to look at research on diversity. God bless you, if you allow me to say that. Now, when we think about culture, culture is more than just your home life. It's your knowledge, your skills, the rules, tradition, beliefs, values that you grew up with. It guides your thinking and behavior. So the group of people where you grew up in, there's many, especially in this area, a lot of Hispanic and Latino families live together as a whole unit. And I mean extended families live together. It's not just mom and dad and the children, right?
Yeah.
Who lives in the big families?
It's like the grandma, uncle, whoever you know.
Right, right. And so their sense of family is the extended family. Everybody lives together. It's grandma, it's grandpa, it's all the uncles, it's all the cousins. They all live in one house.
Or if you don't live in one house, you live like
Next door to each other, right. Now, how many of you grew up with your whole family living together in some area? Okay? All right, so you have that sense. But other families don't grow up that way. And we have to recognize that right now there's a lot of single-parent families. And that's why I'm bringing in also from the adoption agency, because there's a lot of changing families who are adopting children of different cultures and different countries and bringing them in. And how difficult a transition that is for the family as well as the adoptive children. We are defined by geographic regions. Think about that. Where you grow up kind of defines who you are. If many of you grew up here in Western New York and you've lived here all your life, aren't we defined by what New York State is like all about? Now, I'm not picking on Giselle, but you grew up in a whole different geographic region. So contrast now with where you're living. Tell us the major points, differences that you're seeing here versus where you grew up geographically. Besides the climate here that's... Well, you're closer to the ocean, where we're not here. So geographically, are you used to more, is it flat lands, mountainous area, all beach areas?
In downtown LA, it's a lot of hills.
Right.
And I have a bike over there, so I really want to bring my bike here because it's just all flat. And I really want to bring my bike here. Also, I feel like the town is kind of like separated, whereas in LA, and plus here, there's way more houses than I've like ever seen. In LA, there's just apartment buildings, and only apartment buildings, especially in downtown. The only place where you see like all the houses are in the valleys or like way in the outskirts of downtown.
And the social economic class for those people that live in the houses outside of the city?
They're middle class.
Right, upper class. So that's more of the wealthier group. So within the city, you're right, everything is apartments. And here, what do we see geographically? Houses, suburbia. Huge, huge houses, right. Even in the traditional city of Buffalo area, where some of the areas are very wealthy in the city of Buffalo, and they're huge houses there. You're right. So geographically and culturally, you're seeing a shift here from how families live. So that's a good comparison. So if you do move as a teacher, and you're in another state, another area, that's one of the major differences. When I moved to Virginia Beach, there were no jobs here at that time when I graduated, so I wanted to teach, so I moved to Virginia Beach. I knew nobody there, and I thought, geez, it'd be really nice to live by the ocean, which it was. But I had to get used to a whole different geographic area. I had to get used to, if it was down to 20 degrees and it slightly snowed and there was a dusting or an inch of snow, everything shut down in Virginia. It was hysterical. It was like, wow. I mean, we had snow days because they didn't have the equipment to remove it. So thinking cultural and think of the change, it was quite a difference for me. And the same thing there. It wasn't like suburbia here, where we have different sects of, of Williamsville and Clarence and Lancaster. And there, it's more of a big city. So you have to pay attention to where you are living and the group around you and how you're relating to them. And within each group, you can't classify that just because you are Polish, that the whole group is the same. Just because you are Latino, the whole group is absolutely the same. There's variations amongst all the groups, even within religions. If you're Roman Catholic, there's variations between the Roman Catholic religion. If you're Jewish, there's variations amongst the Orthodox, the unorthodox, the different temples. Muslims have different variations. The Protestant faiths have different variations amongst all of them. So as a teacher, you become very wise with picking up and studying and making sure that you are aware of those various differences. This is huge. Unknowingly, as a teacher, you may show your stereotyping, your bias. In what way do you think that might come out in the classroom? Or have you ever experienced that kind of...
You know, it's like certain things you say, like certain phrases, like if someone, not like stereotyping, I don't know if it's a stereotyping, but like if a teacher is super religious and a person, like a student is not, like some things that they say, the teacher might come off as like offensive to someone who's not super religious.
Absolutely. The things you post in the classroom. Even the literature and the selection of materials that you might read. What you bring into your classroom, you have to be very careful that you're not stereotyping, so that it's eclectic across the board. And you don't want to stifle anyone within your classroom. Think about social class. I want you to turn to, well, first look at 211. There's a great example in here as the culture as an iceberg. And when you think about icebergs, what do we know about icebergs? Exactly. And so you think about it. You only see the tip of the iceberg that's extending out of the water. But underneath, it's probably a large mass that is deep. And so if you look at this as a great example for culture as an iceberg, what we see on top is just the surface of what a culture possesses. But look below. What's something below that iceberg in the grayed out area that you never even thought about as far as culture? Why? Why is that such an important part of different cultures?
I don't know, I just think I've never thought about it.
You never thought about it. Because there's different gauges within each culture. Some people might think, someone who is very outgoing and very effervescent and free to discuss it, that person has to be insane. Who would ever be that way? It's because of our culture who defines what we think is sane and insane. It's where you are raised. It's that prejudice kind of thinking within an eclectic family. That's a good point. Do you remember when I gave the example in class about the eye contact? Think about certain cultures. Which cultures do you think have a difficult time with eye contact? And what do we know as growing up in our culture about what eye contact means to us? I think I also gave the example of rolling of the eyes. McKinley.
Yeah. For some cultures, like, eye contact is important. Other cultures, it's disrespectful. Like, I know for me growing up, I couldn't look like adults in the eyes. Like, when they were switching, I couldn't look at them. Especially, like, the eye rolling thing was especially like that. Like, that was like...
So what did your culture feel about young children looking in the eyes of the adults?
Well, like, I don't know, like, for my mom, like, when I got in trouble or stuff like that, and I would, like, try and explain something to her, and I'd look her in the eyes to talk about it, she'd be like, don't look at me. I was just like, how are we going to talk if you can't?
Right.
Look?
So it's a communication
Yeah.
vehicle in the culture. Right. And if you think about some Asian and other culture, what are typically females in the Asian culture? They look down. Why? Correct. So you have to be aware of those cultures that I told you about, the young child that came from Iran. And in Iran, the parents, especially the father, has huge respect for their male sons. But they don't have that strong belief about females going to school, being educated. The females take care of the families, they stay at home. So when they come in and they speak to us and they have a female principal, think of how the male leader of that family felt about me being a female principal who was in charge of the school. It's not the same respect. And you can't take it as a slap in the face. You have to be an understanding person to say, you know, I accept that that is your culture, but here, you know, we treat male, females, mostly equally, and respectfully. So your daughter will be just as successful as your son will be. Sabrina?
My neighbors are so like they won't talk to me unless I'm with my dad or my brother.
Oh.
I'm not married, but they don't talk to my mom who's married.
Oh, that's interesting.
Like I'm at the house now, and he's like looking at me, and I'll have to go.
Oh, so you have to go get your,
Yeah, because I know that they can talk to me.
and what cultures?
They're honest,
Amish. Oh,
so they don't really. They always look to see my dad's car, see if he's home. And they call
before they come over and speak. Yeah, it was interesting. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Breaking Amish. Did you ever see that? And I think that's a little, I mean, but it's the young women and men who are trying to break out of the Amish religion because of the tightness in that culture. And they go to New York City while they're experiencing everything. And you know, as with anybody, if you're out of your culture and you're trying to experience something new, it could go either way. You're like, and some of them have like gone completely different away from their Amish faith. And we have a large population of Amish here in New York State, in Pennsylvania. Sam?
But have you ever felt that in the show Breaking Amish that it's different than like Amish families like that live in her neighborhood?
I think so. Yeah.
'Cause I feel like they make it seem like it's so
Drastic. Yeah. But I think, again, there's different sects of the Amish population.
like I feel like they have different taboos as to what they can and can't.
Right. Yeah. I think, and it probably is part of the religious sect of, you know, those that are diehard, you know, strict Amish versus some that might accept both.
We put up posting stations at our local Walmart for the Amish, and then they come and buy pigs and milk.
Oh.
It's very, what? It's weird.
Why did they do that?
Because you would think that they'd bake all their own eggs and
Right.
stuff, but they buy it.
They buy it.
Sometimes they buy clothes and stuff.
They cheat the system.
They ride the horses around.
Oh, let's not stereotype because yeah, and that's the other issue. You know, like they don't drive cars. Their transportation mode is horse and buggy.
Main things that they buy.
Well, they have to bake. And why not buy it at Walmart? Again, you're going to fall into those different sects and areas, and the best thing you can do as a teacher is research and talk to the family, because you don't want to be offensive to anybody, and you want to understand where they're coming from, because you don't want to make children feel uncomfortable in the classroom either. Because a lot of times the children don't understand it either. They just know that's the way I'm raised and that's what I have to do, but they don't have a background to it. So we talked a little bit before about the social economic status. And I want you to look at 216 in table 6.1, because we're going to talk about the different social classes, because it truly does affect education in school. It depends where you're teaching, and it depends on the class of students that you have. If you look at the upper class, the class that we refer to as the wealthiest, and you look at their income level of being $500,000 to billions of dollars, I mean, I don't know if any of us could ever relate to that kind of money. But just think of your needs and wants in a household like that. If you grew up in a household with billions of dollars, how different would your lifestyle be? Exactly.
Totally different.
Yes. And typically in school, we don't want them to work towards materialistic things. What do you want to emphasize in schools for kids to work for? What's the goal? Do you ever have those teachers that gave out a prize for everything? No. No, Andrea? No. How many did? How many always had the teacher with the prize box and the, yeah, okay. What was the background for that? What did they feel?
That helped me at work on.
Right. And what do we want most as teachers for our students? Success. Now, if you had to come into class every day because I rewarded you with something, would that be a self-motivator? Not really. Because what happens with those materialistic things after a while? You get used to it, and what happens with it? Yeah. It doesn't last for long. Then you have to raise the bar. It's like there was an article, again in the paper, about paying $1 for grades. Some parents that, you know, you earn an A, you'll get $1, or you earn a B, you get $1. An A is worth $2. The report card comes in and they say this is worth. What's the point of going to school? To learn. So what do we call that? I always refer to it for the kids, I have a job, you have a job. Your job is to be the most successful person you can be in your school. If we paid you to come to school every day, do you think you'd be self-motivated? Yeah? How much would you want to earn per class? Exactly. If it equal, just think if it was equal pay to what you're paying tuition-wise, right?
I'll be here every day.
I'll be here every day, right.
I'll say
Pay me for, I'll be right on board. But how effective do you think your learning and your work would be?
Literally what a job is. You go there every day to get money.
True.
This is why I work.
True. That's true. It is a motivator, you're right. But you achieve for self-satisfaction also, and your self-directed learning. So as your students in the class are learning, you don't want to impart on them all the time that they have to come to school because you're going to pay them off in some way. But you want them to be respectful of earning something. And I'm not saying giving rewards like prizes in the classroom or recognizing them in some way should not be done. But I don't think it should be done for everything. Make it something as a goal to work for. Set up goals in your classroom that they achieve and they can see their level of achievement growing. So what's some example of things that you can do to help them achieve and reach a goal? What's something that you can work for to achieve that would be a wonderful recognition? Okay. So what would be the reward for that?
No, that was my question. Like,
Oh.
do they have to learn something? To
See, learn something, right. They have to achieve something.
Like the first time I compromised with my dad, like I wanted an Xbox. He goes,
Oh.
what do I get
What?
back?
Oh, okay.
I don't know, cause when the Kinect came out, so
Yes.
you could just move around.
Yeah.
So I was like, well, if I buy workout games on that, I can just work out with you, and then. That's
Nice.
how
So
that
you
is.
could. That was a motivator for both of you. So you connected with him
Yeah.
in a way that you both achieved something.
Yeah.
I'm thinking goals and.
Well, you had a teacher that every time we did, like, we walked in the hall correctly, or we got all of our work done in a certain amount of time, we get a lucky book. And
Good.
after
Okay.
a certain amount of time, if you accumulated them, you could buy things out of his prize box, but
Okay.
not until you had enough.
Right. And some teachers do a class motivator where the group works together towards a common goal, and at the end it might be like a pizza party. It was before all the allergies hit the classroom, but you have to be careful about the food.
My internship last year with the first grade class, they had warm and fuzzies, and then when your
Perfect.
jar got full of warm
Warm and
and
fuzzies.
fuzzies, you got a prize of some kind.
Right.
But class as a whole didn't.
So why do you think visual motivators do work? Well, yes, it's materialistic, but it's also visual. If you can see your success growing, you feel that much more pride and work towards it. So if you see your grades improving and you're looking along the way your semester and you see your grades improving and you see that what you're working on has really come forward because your grades are great, you're going to keep motivating yourself to keep going. But what happens to that poor child that tries and tries and tries and just has a hard time achieving? Right. And so after a while, emotionally, they tend to give up. So when we were talking about the special education population and those children that have hard learning problems, and you have to be cognizant with that because they will not achieve at that same level. So maybe they're not earning as many lucky bucks. So as a teacher, you have to think about that within that class of your children and say, I need to find another way to help that child feel motivated and achieve and success. So when you're looking at the social economics class here, and look across the board, think about the education level of all of those classes. When you're teaching children who are in the lower class, social economic class, that means a high poverty environment, typically the education level of the parents is high school or less. So what will they think about education as a whole? It's not important. And what will they focus on, do you think, with their children at home? Do you think it's going to come home and let's do your homework and have this all done and work on your projects? And what do you think they'll focus on? Sam? Right. Their idea is work is first. So if you drop out of school, get a job, that's what's going to be important. Because a lot of them depend on their children to actually help support them. Sam?
I mean, my parents' furthest education was high school. So since I'm their only child, they always push that school comes first. And for them, work comes first, but for me,
Right.
school comes first.
And why do you think that's so?
Because they didn't have the luxury of going to college, and they're giving me the luxury.
Exactly. So they're using their example of who they are as strong individuals and recognizing that. They want better for you, Sam, and that they're recognizing that the way to get a better life is going to be able to get a college degree and be successful in your career. And that's an awesome set of parents because they're sacrificing everything they have to make sure that you're going to be secure. That's awesome. So you have to think about that for children in your classroom. And that goes back to that stereotyping and thinking culture-wise and class-wise. So depending on where you grew up and what your environment was like, you have to be recognizing that there's other environments to deal with. You think about health coverage is a huge part, and you hear that all the time now on the news, don't you? What has happened with our society right now that has affected our whole healthcare society plan? Obamacare. And why do you think that was so important that that came to be? What's been happening with our employment? And so with more and more unemployed people and receiving other services, people are not covered. And why is that important to us as a society and in education as a whole? How does health impact our society and our school? Right. Sick kids have a hard time learning. If you have a high rate of children who never see a doctor, and I know the whole case of immunizations and people that feel strongly against or for, but if you have children who are continuously sick, who do not have food, they don't have a great diet. There was a posting in the paper the other day, and they did a study on our local school districts, the highest obesity rates amongst our local school districts in Western New York. Why are they doing studies of obesity rates for children in school? How does that impact education? How many of you try to work out in some way whatsoever, whether it's walking or in any way? Okay, why do you do that? To live longer. What happens with your system if you're eating better, exercising, you have more energy, your brain functions better, you feel better? Right. So what happens with young children who come from a poverty home with poor health, poor eating, lack of nutrition? What's happening with them? Right. They are not performing academically well because they're tired, they don't get sound rest, they don't have the nutrition that balances their brain accessibility, and they don't have the health. They may be very sickly children, but they don't have the money for health care. So when it comes to priority at home, and it's I'm going to buy a loaf of bread or we're going to go to the doctor, what's going to happen? Right. Exactly. So when you're working in a school that has a high poverty rate and those children come to school continuously sick, or they don't come to school at all because they are continuously sick, it's like children living in homes with smoking parents, having severe asthma. They can't function. Then think about across the board here in the neighborhoods. Look from the upper class to the lower class, the difference in the environment. That affects your children when they come to school. The kids that have everything and the kids that may not have anything. So if you're having a celebration in your classroom and you ask each child to bring in, you're going to have those kids that don't have the opportunity to bring those things in, and it makes them feel uncomfortable. And then, interesting, they included the political power. Why would that affect our families? What typically, and we see it now with Trump's running, he has all the money in the world, doesn't he? So what does he focus on? What's his agenda? What's he thinking? He's coming from a background that he had never had any wants, right? He's running on a platform of money and power. And you think about that in the upper class, they're politically involved. So they're part of our community, our nation, who are making decisions for everybody else. What's happening to the lower class? They're not involved with it, so they don't even feel a part of our society anymore. They feel like, why vote? I have no power to it. So it's splitting our classes. So you think about that. There's a lot of studies and research, sociology and psychology, on the split of powers and the split of education. And you don't want that to happen within your class. And you can only control what's happening within your own community classroom. You can't control the outside world, but what you can do is influence your students to think in another way. So this is what impacts us the most. When we're thinking about social economic status, you think about the children who come from very wealthy homes. There's never a doubt in their mind that college won't be paid for, right? So you think along the way, they're the higher achieving kids. That's a focus in their family. So the longer the child's in poverty, the stronger the impact is on achievement. Which way do you think that happens? What do you think the impact on achievement is for a child in poverty? That's right. Because they don't see a way out. And like we said before, the focus is on working. It's not on school. They don't see how their achievement in school is going to give them a better life. They don't see that end of the road that says, I can be very successful and I can be out there earning a good living and taking care of my family. Because their environment does not support that. So you as a teacher have to make sure that all your children are treated equally and you give them that sense of respect and success towards education. You find the way to make them feel achieving. And again, you try to bring the families in so they become a part of it. And they're not, because those are the families that won't come to parent conferences. They're afraid to come into school because they've not been successful. They may not have made it past 5th grade or high school. So do you think they're going to feel comfortable coming in and talking to a teacher? No. So you have to build a rapport with them in some way to make them feel established and meaningful for them to be part of your classroom. Having activities where the parents come in. Having culture days that you bring them in and you have them teach their culture to your class. It makes them feel important and it makes them want to be part of your classroom. And that then, in turn, will help your children be more successful. And we'll stop here. Ethnicity. What does it mean? It's culturally transmitted behavior. It's not a disease. What does that mean? Ethnicity is culturally transmitted. Absolutely. And you will carry that on in your life. Your culture will live with you. You will carry that on. It will live on in your children. But it also lives on in your teaching. And race? Race refers to your physical traits. Biological. You are born with certain race biological traits. That's not stereotyping. That's who you are physically. So you have to be really careful in the classroom because sometimes children, even, well, especially we know with adolescents, use that as a negative bullying behavior when they make comments about certain physical traits for races. Okay, on Thursday, bring your laptops, please, so that we can get on your chalk and wire. If you already, does anybody have a chalk and wire account yet? Okay, yeah, well, you do. Okay, Mrs. Z sent that out. Okay, if she sent that, bring that email with you.